So did we just survive these regime change propaganda operation over Iran? Do we make it through, or is it just started?
Yeah, you're saying, well, um, I'm sure they have more tricks up their sleeve. Yeah, the last I saw is that yeah, the protests had been, you can say, suppressed or died down, a combination of the two, and that there was a very, very large counter demonstration of supporters of, the government in Tehran. So, it appears for the time being that the government is getting the upper hand. Um, yeah, it's hard to understand what's going on. I've gone to different people, like, for example, Trita Parsi, who is an expert, an Iranian himself, not a supporter of the government, but not anti-Iranian, opposed to the attacks on Iran and so on and so forth. And generally, very well informed about Iran in general. And he just admitted he didn't know what was going on because there's really been the government hit the kill switch. And I think, with, not for nefarious reasons, but because they understood that it was being used. It was part of, a plan to foment unrest and to topple the government. And so it was shut down. And that means that, we just are getting very, very limited information. And some of it is, with AI and all the other tricks that exist now, it's really hard to know what really happened. But clearly there was there were violent demonstrations. They started off peacefully, and I think that they were organic. There was, again, in particular, the devaluation of the real and inflation. And then they spread, they grew, and then they became violent. And I think that that's maybe where we're seeing the hand of Mossad or the CIA. Again, a lot of people would think, oh, you're reaching for a conspiracy theory. You're just making excuses for them. But we look at the history of Iran. Look at the recent, the 12-day war and what preceded it. It's almost to be expected. It would be very strange. I would be very surprised if the Mossad and the CIA and other, external agents were not involved in exploiting these attacks. Some cases you may have secessionists. There are many different ethnic groups in Iran. It's a very, multi-ethnic country. So you have the Baluchis and Kurds and so on and so forth. And they have their separatist movements. But the thing is, like, okay, yeah, maybe they were involved to some extent. But the thing is, they are supported by the CIA. The CIA sees them as, potential against weapons that they can use against the regime or the government. And they have been using them. And I think probably they used them in these protests. So I think the only question is like, to what extent, when we're looking at it, was it organic? What extent was it manufactured from abroad or supported from abroad? And we don't really know. Now, I think there probably were really reasons to be angry at the government. My understanding is that in dealing with budget shortfalls, they made the mistake, which the classic mistake of printing money to make up the shortfall. So you got this inflation, you got the devaluation of the real. That's a predictable result of that kind of economic action on the part of the government. So that was incompetence. That was sheer incompetence, if that report that I got was true. And I think it was true. It was by somebody who was really qualified to talk about it. So there were reasons to be angry. The problem is, like, every time there is a reason to be angry to demonstrate, then you have these people who do not have the interests of Iran at heart to move in and try to take advantage of it. And the government is forced to respond forcefully. Now, I'm not going to, probably in some cases they responded too forcefully. I don't know. I'm not there. We don't know. But anyway, that's where we are right now. And I've heard that, again, their armed forces have been on a high state of alert. They don't want a repeat of what happened in June of last year, where they were taken by surprise. They're expecting an attack. And we've heard rumors from within the U.S. that Trump is instructing his generals, to prepare something. again, this all this murky world, what's happening behind the scenes. But there's a real chance. Trump apparently is, he's mad about these demonstrations and he wants to punish Iran. This is sort of I think, again, this is not strategic or rational thinking. It's just emotional thinking. And that's what we see often in Trump. There was that report about dancing Maduro. We don't know if that was true. But the thing is, we know Trump. It very well may have been true. Or I just heard this morning, just to give you another example, something somewhat different, is that he decided that, okay, Exxon will not be allowed to go into Venezuela because he didn't like the way that, the Exxon CEO talked at that press conference. Again, what is it? It's just personal. It's emotional. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah. Well, one thing that seems to be a bit different about this regime change operation is the messaging isn't as consistent because usually the style is to say that, oh, this is an organic thing, and we're just here to liberate the people of Iran. But Israel itself has been quite open about it. The Jerusalem Post had a headline that says, Mossad spurs Iran protests as agents with demonstrators and Farsi messages. As protests grow across Iran, the Mossad posted unusual Farsi message urging demonstrators to act. So they are open about it. They made in Jerusalem Post. Haaretz had an article says the Israeli influence operation aiming to install Reza Pahlavi as Shah of Iran. So they're just saying it. And then we had Mike Pompeo as well with a tweet saying, to all those Mossad agents alongside the protesters.
Right.
So I think this is the problem. We're very open. Same thing with Venezuela now. It's like, oh, we're not here to liberate Venezuela, save them from evils of socialism.
Well, sometimes we talk.
Exactly. We do sometimes, and then we say the other thing. So it's like... Yeah. It's like they've forgotten how the playbook works.
Well, I think they've just lost their sense of caution. In that Haaretz article, I remember there were some comments like, yeah, you're not supposed to say this out loud. Actually, some other Israeli officials were annoyed by the fact that, again, you mentioned that that group that is supporting the Hasbara group that's supporting the Shah and trying to get him reinstated or whatever, create some sort of support for him within Iran. Yeah, they said, yeah, I understand why you do this, said this other Israeli official, but you don't say that out loud. So there is some concern even within Israel about this. And I'm sure, and I think we see the same thing in the U.S. Recently, who knows what statement he's made since then, but very recently, Trump made a statement, I think, in speaking to the New York Times, said, oh, no, it wasn't about the oil. I just kind of noticed the oil later. And I think it was an attempt to walk back because they did have their propaganda, scheme all worked out ahead of time. It's going to be about this and it's going to be about that, remember. And then, but Trump just doesn't, he tends to act impulsively, and he forgot about that and started talking openly about the oil. And I think you're finding a similar situation in Israel. I guess it's just a product of being sort of a hegemon for such a long time, is that you lose your sense of caution, the need to actually to cover up, your true intentions.
Well, I think Trump actually stating his true intentions with Venezuela might actually be better than going with the typical route of spreading liberal democracy. I think that maybe not ironically, but this actually resonates more with his base. Just like, yeah, I'm being open about it. We need oil and I'm going to take it. But the problem with Iran is that you're saying that you care about these protesters so much and you're just doing it because you have such a big heart and you don't want to see people die. Meanwhile, we just watch what Israel's doing. We watch tens of thousands of children get obliterated. And now you're saying that you care about these protesters and if don't you lay a finger on a hair of their head, or else we'll come in guns a-blazing. And meanwhile, over this weekend, we've had massive protests across the United States, but it's like they're trying to ignore it. And when they're talking about the protests, It's like, oh, let's just talk about this protest on the other side of the country that we are openly admitting in press releases from Israel that this is an Israeli Mossad operation, that we are heavily involved in this. So it just doesn't work. Like, how can you send that message that we're just doing this because we just love freedom so much? Now, we just got to go over there.
This double standard is not new. It's just become more blatant over time. And
but you can't use that playbook now because of what you've done in Gaza. You
Yeah.
know, as one thing,
Well,
and
among certain people, you can. You know, I'm struck by it again. Like reading these Haaretz articles. You know, these again are supposed to be the bleeding heart Israelis, and they're talking about they're concerned for the Iranian people, and I just, oh, come on, give me a break. You know, this is you know that your government is not concerned about the Iranian people or any other people other than yourselves. But it does actually seem to work to some extent. But I think the population upon which this kind of propaganda is effective is shrinking, you know, with every day. It still works with some people. But yeah, the rest of the world looks at it and says, yeah, this is too obvious. Give me a break.
Right. But the thing is that I think that the media, the people that are really kind of in control, a lot of it coming from Israel, they realize that they don't need to convince the masses. They just need to convince Trump. And so when I'm watching all these news clips, turn on Fox News, they're all praising Trump, saying like, "This is it, Trump. You're the peacemaker. You got to go in. This is your time to shine." And you know, we know Trump, that he eats that stuff up. And you were just saying earlier how
right.
Yeah, just how, you know, he sees one video of Maduro dancing and that could change his opinion. So really, they just realize they can be brazen. All they have to work on is the flattery with Trump. And I saw it all over the news on all different channels, whether it's just pundits or they're putting Reza, how do you pronounce his last name? Pahlavi,
Yeah,
and they're just all sucking up to Trump, just how great you are, Trump, that you're doing this and this is your time to create your legacy, and you know, this is it. And let's see, we'll just have to find out if it worked or if his mind is changing. Unfortunately, everything just seems to depend on how Trump's feeling.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's a very good point. And probably that may be right, that's the main focus of so much of this. They know that he actually gets a lot of his information from TV and while ignoring his intelligence briefs. You know, that's been reported several times. And so you say this is a way to reach him. You know, we can work him on with the intelligence briefs because we have this very, you know, maybe not exactly control, but, you know, almost one of our guys is running the CIA. John Ratcliffe, you know, somebody who's, you know, an avowed Zionist, and he was just funneling Mossad intelligence to Trump prior to the 12-day war. So they got that, but they also know that he is very concerned about, you know, what he sees on TV. And sometimes it seems like that's the reality. For him, that is reality. So there are two ways to get him, and they're probably working on both.
Right. Well, let me show you kind of what he's seeing on TV, just so we get an idea of maybe the headspace that Trump is occupying, because we know that a lot of his worldview is shaped by Fox News. So I'll play this clip.
That there are two things that are completely different than the previous demonstrations. One is that the regime is at its weakest point in 45 years. Politically, they can't meet the social and political and economic aspirations of the people. Economically, they're in the tank, to be sure, and with no prospect of recovering. And militarily, they just lost a war. They've lost their platform in Syria. Their proxies are, by and large, decapitated and almost eliminated, to be sure. And the result of all of that is they are in a fundamentally weak position. And it's serious in terms of the regime. Mm-hmm. And when you have that, it also breeds discontent and breaks down trust and unity because people begin to fear about their own survival. The second thing that's completely different, Brett, and that is President Trump. He is in power, and he uses force to accomplish significant objectives, but uses limited force. And he has told them, no uncertain terms, if you kill these people, you're going to answer to me, paraphrasing his words. They've killed 48. They've imprisoned about 2,000. We know when they put them behind the walls, what do they do to them? They torture them, they beat them, and they hang them. And they do that out of public view for all the obvious reasons. If I was in the Iranian regime, I would take President Trump dead serious here.
Yeah, I think you're right. And probably Trump watched that and saying, yeah, you know,
this is also,
you know,
just a microcosm, I want to say, like I watched a fair amount of news clips. There's so many that are just like this. So anytime Trump turned on the news, it doesn't seem to be about the protests here in the United States. It's all about Iran. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, that's true. But again, that's always been true. People have commented on the same. Even when there's some really, massive protests in France, you would be hearing about a very minor protest in Moscow or something. That's what everybody would be watching. Not, even when it was only, 5% the size of the protest in France. Yeah, that's an old story, but like we're saying, it's being used in a real sledgehammer-like fashion now. All the subtlety is gone.
Yeah, but I feel like this propaganda it's becoming too obvious. It's not working on us, but the question is, does that matter? Does it matter if it doesn't work on us? Because it may not. Yeah. Trump is in his bubble, and that's all that matters is what Trump thinks. So It's a little scary.
Yeah, certainly when it comes to, a brief air operation, it doesn't matter. He can do it. He can get it. And if he succeeds and, no plane is shot down, he can proclaim victory and maybe get even a little boost. I don't think he's going to get much of a boost from these things. He'll have his cheering section will cheer loudly for a while. But most people, again, in this country are not focused on this. Like nobody even hardly, was thinking about Venezuela before he created it as an issue. And I really don't think, outside of the Zionist community, which is significant in this country, but it's still a minority of, real committed Zionists, that people really care about Iran. They care about their own country. And if he keeps on doing this could actually even hurt him in the long run. The Democrats can say that this is a president that just obsessed with foreign matters, and he's not taking care of this country. And I think, I think in the end, it's not going to help him. It might not hurt him in the very short run. Again, if he succeeds with some sort of brief air operation, but there's always a risk with Iran that it could turn into something much bigger. And then it really will hurt him, if he becomes entangled, if there are strikes on military bases, if the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, anything like that, or significant damage to Israel. And, and then we're all in real trouble. And there's always that risk.
Yeah, to me, it feels like if something's going to happen, it needs to happen soon, because there was a lot that went into this propaganda campaign over the weekend. And I feel like they can't do that again. It's the same thing with Operation Rising Lion. This seems to be their second Operation Rising Lion, but wasn't as successful. And I think every subsequent one will be less and less effective because the Iranians are aware and the citizens are aware. And, I saw a report this morning that I think the foreign minister Arachi says that they have evidence of U.S. and Israeli involvement, documents proving that they were behind a large part of this. And they also said that we may strike first. That is something that was new, that they won't sit around and wait, right?
Yeah, well, it's not, they say they're going to, they
reserve the right.
The right to reserve the right to exercise that option. But they're not saying that they definitely will,
right.
But it just anyway shows that I think they learned something from that strike last June. This is not going to happen again. If it does, that's just shocking incompetence on the part of the Iranians. Yeah, I think, but clearly, I think, as far as I can tell, they really have learned from that, and it's not going to happen again. So this is another thing to think about. Clearly there is a push for war. We've seen it. Not just these protests and the accompanying, media campaign, but there was the drumbeat began earlier, and we talked about that a few weeks ago. But it doesn't mean that there still are, let's say, obstacles to war. There are these subjective obstacles, and one is that I think probably the biggest one is the lack of interceptors in the West, including Israel. And I think that was the main reason that the Israel and the U.S. actually just requested a ceasefire and ended that that 12-day war. It's the reason that it was a 12-day war and not a longer war. Now, did they build up those stockpiles? It's hard to believe that they have. We just have very limited production capacity, both in Israel and in the U.S. when it comes to interceptors. So are they really prepared to do this? Who knows? But it seems like it's very reckless. And again, I don't think they can pull off something like Operation Rising Lion, where they can do some significant damage within the country at the start of the war. I don't think it took a couple of days for Iran to recover and to begin to respond. I think this time it's going to be different, and I think they know it's going to be different. So again, there are some reports that the Pentagon is resisting this idea, and they have in the past, but they can be overcome. If Trump just orders it, it'll happen. And if, again, you see these appeals to his ego, he may just ignore the advice of all his generals and say, you're going to do it. And again, that he's developed his faith in his own judgment, partly as a result of the Operation Absolute Resolve in Venezuela. That's again a string of successes, so-called. Can create a sense of invincibility or infallibility on the part of a leader, and that's a very, very dangerous situation. So, he may just ignore their advice and their warnings and go ahead with it, and then we'll see. Maybe he'll get lucky again. Maybe, but especially in the case of Iran, Iran is a much stronger country than Venezuela, with a much, much more formidable military than Venezuela. So it would be a very, very risky operation.
It just feels like this is inevitable with Iran, because the powers that be just want this war so badly. The Zionists, it's really the Zionists that want this war, right? I mean,
above all, there are people that have just a particular hatred of Iran that is, it's hard to separate the two in this case, because for obvious reasons. But yeah, it is the Zionists. I think openly, Israel has been the one that's been pushing, and for the longest time has been pressuring the U.S. government again and again to do it. And the U.S. government always refused. Sometimes they would come close. We'd hear reports that the administration, whichever administration it might have been, is considering attacks on Iran, but then a decision would be made not to. And I think, as I recall, even at the end of the Biden administration, they were considering, but they didn't. But Trump did it, right? Yeah. And so I think, anyway, the fact that he did it means, again, that just incentivizes the Zionists to push even harder. Now we've got this guy. He's, we understand how he works, how to push his buttons. We can get him to do it again. Yeah.
I think one of the things about this massive propaganda campaign, at least to me, is that it exposed the amount of people that have been captured by the Zionists in some way. All these influencers, people that I didn't really think about. I saw like Lex Friedman tweeting about it. It was Eric Weinstein, the one that was tweeting about it, not Brett Weinstein. Sorry, Brett. But
okay,
But even like Andrew Yang, you remember Andrew Yang? He's tweeting about like, can't wait to free Iran. This type of stuff's like, wait a second. They got to you too. They got to everybody. It just showed to me, it's showing the extent. Like, why are you tweeting about this when there's active protests happening in our own country? My buddy just sent me a video from Denver of the protests, just like, why aren't we talking about this? Why are everyone's like, oh, hey, thank God we're bringing freedom to Iran. It's like, well, hey, we got some issues here. Let's talk about America. It's for these politicians, all these pundits. It shows it's scary, actually. It's scary to see how far that reach has gone, how everybody's on the payroll in some way, and they're told to send out these tweets. Yeah. It's not organic.
Well, I wouldn't say that they're actually on the payroll. In some cases, I'm sure it's true, especially some of these influencers. We heard about the $7,000 payments and whatever. Yeah, there are some people that are on the payroll, but a lot of them are convinced Zionists. It's a result of not just, somebody telling them what to do right now, but they have come to believe in this as a result of, you can say, propaganda or,
Yeah.
efforts over the course of years and decades. It's something that they've come to actually believe in. So you don't have to go and tell them to do it. They will. They are believers. They're part of your team, willingly a part of your team.
Yeah, but I think they're being told. I mean, obviously how coordinated it is. I think there's something with this.
Or sometimes it's just, you see this too, and it just, it's throughout the West. Seems to be this hive mind. There's somebody, especially a lead newspaper or media outlet like the New York Times will come up with a certain phrasing, and then within 24 hours, everybody's repeating it, and they've learned to say, oh yeah, this is our slogan. It's just sort of like somebody passed out certain signs that you're supposed to hold up at a protest. It's the same thing. Oh, this is our slogan. They know it. Nobody has to call out that person individually, but it's just sort of, yeah, okay, this is what we're using, and so everybody repeats it to show they're all part of the same team.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think we can avoid war? It just feels like this is going to happen at some point. And I don't know.
We could. Again, there are these subjective constraints here, right? There are real obstacles. There are real difficulties. The people in the Pentagon, are aware of them, and so I'm sure there's some pushback. But again, you can see they're up against a lot. Those people, those realists or semi-realists within the Pentagon, and maybe some of them exist in the State Department too. I don't know. So there is a chance that it won't go anywhere. There's nothing inevitable about this, but as we've been discussing, the pressure to do it is there, and you have somebody in the White House that doesn't seem to really respect, or he does show some awareness sometimes of objective constraints. Maybe another person is coming and say, yeah, wait a second, you think about this, Mr. Trump, or President Trump, I'm sure they would address him that way. Think about this again. Just stop and consider this. If you do this, the Strait of Hormuz could be shut down, and then gas prices will shoot through the roof. And wait a second, that's just not going to help you. That's going to be really bad. Let's think this through. Remember why we actually ended that 12-day war so quickly. Hey, none of those problems have gone away, and maybe he'll remember that. I mean, he has shown an awareness of some, of certain realities. But if somebody can convince it, we have this great plan, you'll go in and you'll take out these things and you'll be a hero, and they won't even have time to respond. And he may go for that. And possibly he'll succeed. But again, with the case of Iran, there's really no guarantee, and they could retaliate in very heavy fashion. So, I'm sure there's some sort of battle going on behind the scenes right now. And I don't know how it's going to turn out. I think, like you say, there's a very, very high risk that we'll see an attack in the near or medium term.